What's up everyone, Zach Nusser here, and today we're going to talk about creatine and hair loss. Specifically, does creatine itself directly cause hair loss? Let's delve in and find out. When it comes to creatine, we're really talking about one specific type of hair loss called androgenic alopecia, aka male pattern baldness, even though women can experience it too. So this form of hair loss is mostly caused by a hormone called DHT, or dihydrotestosterone, which is a metabolite of testosterone that's formed in the body when free test is converted to DHT. So we need to understand the relationship between DHT and the hair follicles. So the hair follicles have a life cycle. They have a growth phase, followed by a resting phase, then the hair falls out. Now in a healthy hair follicle, the hair grows back, usually just as strong. Hair follicles also have a thing called androgen receptors. Now DHT can bind to these androgen receptors and affect the hair follicles. So when DHT binds to the receptors in the hair follicles, it causes a shortening of the hair growth cycle, resulting in the growth of thinner and weaker hairs. Eventually, the DHT can cause those hair follicles to actually stop producing hair altogether. The follicles essentially die. Once the follicles are dead, there's no more hair production there. Clearly, we see why DHT can be a problem and how it directly causes hair loss. But what does that have to do with creatine? Well, really, there was only one study back in 2009, a relatively small study, and it was done on rugby players. The rugby players were assigned to take creatine monohydrate for 3 weeks. 1 week, they did a loading phase of about 25 grams a day, which is pretty standard for a loading phase, but it's a pretty high amount of creatine. The following 2 weeks, they brought it down to about 5 grams a day for their maintenance phase. Now, what they saw when they tested the hormone levels of these rugby players was their DHT levels after the first week were 56% up, which is a pretty significant increase. And even after the maintenance phase, they maintained about a 40% over baseline DHT. It's important to note that testosterone levels themselves did not change whatsoever. And even more importantly, that study had actually nothing to do with hair loss. They were not assessing hair loss. They weren't assessing the hair follicles or how the DHT affected the hair follicles, just simply testing the hormone levels. But of course, since DHT is directly linked to certain types of hair loss, male pattern baldness, of course, people are going to make the assumption, well, if creatine increases DHT in the body and DHT causes hair loss, then creatine must cause hair loss, right? But it's a little bit more complicated than that. Now, it is true that DHT directly causes hair loss whenever it comes to androgenic alopecia, the androgen being DHT. In male pattern baldness, typically the hair follicles that are affected by DHT the most are those on top of the head or the crown, as well as the front of the hairline. There are numerous anabolic steroids out there that are DHT based, and as a result, they have DHT-related side effects, specifically, in this case, hair loss. That said, genetics are really the most important factor here. Some people are either predisposed to male pattern baldness, whereas other people aren't. It's really just a flip of a coin on how lucky you got with your genetics. It's very common for men to have a genetic disposition to hair loss. Now, some people will just genetically have a higher level of activity of androgen receptors in their hair follicles. Other people might have a genetically higher rate of conversion of total test to DHT. At the end of the day, it really comes down to your genetics. Again, there's a lot of anabolic steroids out there that are DHT based. They'll have a far, far higher and far, far more significant impact on your DHT levels, and will definitely directly result in hair loss if you are predisposed to it. Now, does creatine increase those DHT levels enough to cause hair loss? And it's worth noting that this study has never been replicated. The results of this study, specifically the increase in the DHT, has never been replicated in any other study so far done on creatine. There have been at least a dozen studies on creatine and its effects on testosterone. Now, 2 of those studies reported a physiologically insignificant, but still present, increase in total testosterone. That was after around a week of supplementation. Now, the remaining 10 studies pretty much have shown absolutely no change in testosterone whatsoever. 5 of the studies, free test, which again is what the body uses to convert to DHT, was also measured, and no increases were found there either. At this point, the current body of evidence doesn't really suggest that there's any kind of correlation between creatine supplementation and hair loss. Again, on paper it makes sense. You take something that increases your DHT, DHT causes baldness, then inevitably by taking that thing, you're going to lose hair. But again, it's a genetic factor. If you're not genetically disposed to male pattern baldness, then it doesn't matter what you take, you will not lose your hair. Again, none of the other studies on creatine have shown really any impact on hormone levels, testosterone, free test, DHT, none of that. So it's kind of hard to say why this one specific study indicated a significant increase in DHT levels, though there are various factors. There could have been other substances involved that were not reported. There could have been a natural increase in DHT conversion just from heavy weightlifting. Resistance training does in fact increase your conversion of free test to DHT, so that in and of itself can have an impact. At the end of the day, like I said, the evidence doesn't really suggest that taking creatine is going to cause hair loss. If you're going to lose your hair, you're going to lose your hair one way or another, whether it's the creatine or not. But my personal recommendation is that creatine has a lot of benefits, and not just in terms of physical performance like muscle strength and endurance, but also cognitive. We'll talk about some of those benefits in a future video. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, share this video all over the place so we can try to get our viewership up. Thanks for watching.